Whoever bids on that and the construction company that gets it, they know the RFP's on the street and you've committed to Westside. They have their people on the ground mobilized. There's savings for them to keep those people employed as we roll into the next project. So you're kind of in a position to negotiate with them regardless of whether you throw it back out on the street or not. So I think maybe some more advice.
I have a question actually for you. If let's say we kept the RFP we had now, we put a new RFP for the architect, and we know we're going to be building these two buildings, could we put the RFP for the builders in the same one? Would that be possible, even though there might be different architects or the same architect? Would that be possible? Because then that's the main concern, the building of the places. Or does it have to go through the architect? I'm just not sure on that. That was just a... Would you be able to do one RFP for the building of both schools, even if they had, well, different RFPs for the architects?
Yeah, you haven't awarded the construction as of yet.
Right. Well, that's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
And so consequently, you could somehow word a second RFP, okay, that we're building two schools. And if they would like to bid on both of them.
They could build on one, they could bid on one or
Okay.
both.
Because what it assures them that they have that
I don't want
opportunity.
legal issues.
Okay, that's the main thing. Have we awarded an architectural contract?
No, we're negotiating the contract.
Okay.
We've awarded the RFP.
So there isn't really any signed contracts as we speak.
No.
And so I think in that negotiating process, rather than, if we go out with a separate RFP on that next school, just to get an idea of what it's going to cost, we can turn around and in our negotiations, ask what it would be if it was that in our negotiations with the architect, if we just had the one school, what's your bid? Where do we end up negotiating to? If you got the second school, how are you going to come in on it? Because what it will do is give them a distinct advantage in bidding coming into that. Not that they would win it. There may be somebody who wants to even come in lower, and that would be nice. But the architect also would know that they could be doing multiple schools.
Just an idea, so we don't have to have legal.
I guess the question I have here is, does the school board even want to go forward with doing an RFP on Westside?
I do.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, if I may, I know we were all really, we were together on moving forward with Hardy. I don't see why that would need to be pulled back, but I do believe because of the urgency in the market and the way the bond market is currently, and I know Mr. Keaton is prepared to talk to us about that today, while we look at every angle of building a school, and for many of us it's new territory, we're looking at trying to save money on every corner. And part of that is at the bond market. When we first began this conversation, the interest rates were around 2.7. Now they're around 2% or maybe a little bit lower. That's a huge savings to the bottom line of our taxpayers. So if we can go to the bond market for 2 instead of going for 1 and then go and trying to piecemeal years down the road, we save substantial amount of money on tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars for our taxpayers. So that's why, I think if the school board is behind it, there needs to be an understanding of what the costs are for the middle school, so we know what we're looking at. In my opinion, Mr. Keaton, when we're looking at the financial savings, Mr. Chair, if it's all right, Madam Chair, just from a financial side, I want us to understand the savings that 0.5 to 0.75% or potentially more saves the taxpayers in our community, which is why I'm strongly in favor of, for the lack of a better term, bundling and looking at doing a two-school model if we're looking at going to the bond market. It's better to save on the front end than getting one bond moving forward, and then later on, to Ms. Hulick's point, interest rates go up. Let's save all together at the beginning and be the best stewards we can. That's all my point is.
Jim, how soon could we put out an RFP for Westside? Like, how soon could we get that out?
We could probably get an RFP out next week. We have the format already completed. It just imagine,
Put it
matter
out.
of changing some words to middle school and
Get it,
a little different. I mean, that part is not difficult. And then it's got to be on the street for, I don't know, 20 or 30 days. And then it's a matter of,
Y'all wouldn't put that, we wouldn't ask y'all to put that out or agree to put.
I'd say put it
whatever
out,
the
in my
right terminology
opinion.
is.
Consensus, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but
No.
what would the consensus of our board be? To put the RFP out and let's understand the financial piece of it.
You good with that, Don? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We're in agreement.
I think.
So then there's no breach of the previous RFP.
Right.
That's
And then
what
if we need to
concerns
bundle the
me, is the
construction-
breach of the previous RFP.
Right.
That's
And
my
doing
concern.
this, what we're talking about now, doesn't breach that.
Right.
And when we move toward bundling, it's got to be savings. It's going to be to our advantage.
Mr. Keaton, I think, is going to
We could
talk to
bundle
us
the
about.
construction
Well,
costs.
you've got a couple of documents in front of you. You've got the funding timeline and then the debt service comparison. So if we look at the black and white document first, the funding timeline, I just had Jimmy Sanderson with Davenport give us a projected timeline to issue the bonds. So in August, we would start preparing the documents, including the credit presentation, the preliminary official statement. We probably had to make a trip to meet with the rating agencies and insurance companies. In mid to late August, we would publish a notice of public hearing for 2 consecutive weeks. And then in early September, the board could hold a public hearing. The week of September 14th, we would actually hold the rating agency conference calls. And then we would mail the preliminary official statement in early part of October. That's when we would need to know the amount we were going to borrow. That's the dilemma with the funding is, you're probably not going to have bids in hand or may not have bids in hand by that time, but you need to know an approximate amount before we, send out the official statement. Then, middle of October, we would have the pricing, and then we would have the closing around the end of the month. Now, this is a timeline to get the funds borrowed, before the election cycle, try to get it while there's not as much uncertainty in the market. As Mr. McCarty said, rates have come down. We first started talking about this, I believe it was back in maybe as late as November. Rates were in the 2.7% range. In February, they came down to around, I think, 2.2%, and then this ones I just got the other day were right around 2%. He actually did a bond issue for Johnston County, North Carolina, 1.6% for 20 years.
That's huge.
So that was a 20-year bond. We're looking at 25-year bonds here. Now, if you look at the color-coded document, this is a lot of columns, and I'll focus on which ones we're talking about. So this is taking our existing debt service and layering in 2 additional bond issues, one in 20, calendar year 20, and one in calendar year 22, which was the way we projected it. So column A just shows the existing county debt service, all of our debt service. And you can see in the current fiscal year, FY20, which is going to end, we hit a peak of $12,675,000 per year. That was our highest point, and it starts dropping after this. So you'll see in the upcoming year, it drops by a little over $200,000. The following year, another $160,000, and then it levels out, and then it starts dropping. But when we get down to the dramatic drop in 2028, it drops by $1.2 million. So that's where our tipping point is, where our debt service really starts to drop. So now column B is where we would start adding in the new debt service for the schools and our other capital needs. So with the capital budget the board just adopted recently, we have 28.1 million in capital needs over the next 2 years, and then another 36.2 million over the next 3 years after that. So really, this is looking at a 5-year capital improvement project for all county needs, including schools. So based on this model, we would issue 28 million in this year, and the debt service starting in 2022 will be $1,450,000, and you can see the following year about the same amount. Then in 2022, we would issue the second bond issue, and then those debt payments would start in 2024, and that's when the total debt service gets up to the $3.3 million range. Now, so then column C, the third column, shows the total existing and the total debt service going on out. Now you'll see there's 3 years there in the 4 years in the 2024 to 2027 range where our debt service peaks around 15.5 million. All right, so then the next column over just shows the difference between the debt service between the first year and the second year. Column E, we've projected in 2.4 million in revenue, which would be generated from a 5-cent tax increase. And then the next column, E minus D equals F, shows the difference or the excess or the shortfall. So the first couple of years, we actually have an excess amount of money from the additional tax revenue. But then we have 4 years, again, that goes back to those peak years, where there's a shortfall. So we would bank the money the first 3 years from the tax increase, then it would pay off those years when it's short. But if you look down, if you go down to year 2031, that's actually the year that our debt service drops below that 2.4. So in other words, we really only need the tax increase for 10 years to pay the combined debt service. After that, the debt service drops dramatically. You wouldn't need that 5 cent anymore based on these 5 years. So it wouldn't be you wouldn't need a tax increase for this debt for 25 years. You really only need it for 10 years. After that, our old debt service drops so rapidly that it would more than offset that 2.4 million in the 5-cent tax increase.
Madam Chair, I have a question. May I? So when we're looking at the taxes and whatnot, is this just for what we have currently, not for any new builds? Like I know they're building the retirement community, and they've got some apartments going up in different places.
Yes.
Smithfield. So those are not counted into this.
No, this is using our actual tax base per penny, which is $480,000 per penny right now.
Okay.
It does not factor in growth. So this is using the most conservative approach we
Right.
could use.
So, potentially there could be not a 5-cent tax increase. It could be a 3 cents tax increase based on the growth in the county or
Well, it would
4.
be 5 based on today's current
Right.
needs. But like I said, you would only need it for 10 years. And then after that, it could drop off.
Okay.
Because once you get to year 2031, the excess, the $2,382,000 equals the amount of the tax increase. So it basically washes out because the old debt service drops so dramatically, it offsets the 2.4 million in revenue that we would need.
Yeah, I just see a lot of building up in the Carrollton area, so that's more tax money too. So I just didn't know
And
if
of
that
course-
was in this. That's all I was asking, if that
Right.
was in this.
Yeah, and some of that's tax, you're going to have other needs beyond the first 5 years, so you're going to have other capital needs. But I'm just saying, if you just focus on these first 5 years of the capital budget, you would really only need it for 10 years. Now, that doesn't mean anything beyond those first 5 years, so I'm not trying to say you wouldn't need it for going forward. But once you get past those years, then that frees up money that could be used for other capital needs in the future.
And Randy, if you would, this particular model is based on what type of an interest rate?
2%. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So let me just mention a number. So in the past, what typically we would use as a estimate, if we were in the past, if we were just estimating interest rates, usually it would be a 4 to 4.5% interest rate, which is about $70,000 per million. If you just take, if you say what does it cost per million to borrow money, about $70,000 per million. At the 2% is $51,600 per million. So it's 35% lower than what we would typically estimate as a debt payment for this amount of money. So that's where the savings is.
It's a big deal.
It's the debt payment. I mean, if we were looking at this amount of money be borrowed with the normal interest rates, it would take a lot more than a 5-cent tax increase to pay for it. So it's only possible because of the interest rates being so low. I just read this week in the Fed announced that they will probably be keeping the interest rates close to zero through 2022. So if that is true, then hopefully these interest rates would stay in place for the next 2 years. So we would still be able, of course, these interest rates typically track the 10-year Fed rate. But if the Fed keeps the rates near zero, hopefully these rates will stay in place. They're going to bump around a little bit, but hopefully they stay in this range.
Thank you.
I do think this is a golden opportunity. I do know in a county this size and smaller where I've served most of my career, to have single-digit tax increase to build one school, you're fortunate. To be able to build 2 schools this size for 5 cents is unbelievable opportunity. And I do think if we're able to do a new RFP for Westside, get on the street, and then bundle, as Mr. Grice said, the 2 projects, when we put them out to bid for a construction company, we may get some more savings and take advantage of this time. So I think it's a good opportunity for our citizens. And if you look at the big picture, which is what we said for growth for this county, and particularly for the northern end, where a lot of the growth is happening, we still are looking at that middle school that exists now being an 8-12 high school. If we're able to do these 2 projects now, we'll leave a lot of growth for that high school, which I know Mr. Grice and I have had some side conversations, and he has done a lot of research. The most expensive building to build is a high school. And so to have that room for growth in a new Hardy, and then to move some of the students out of Carrollton, have growth in Carrollton, have growth in a new middle school, which is what Westside would become, a middle school, and then that tremendous growth in high school. You've really put this county in a great position for growth and for our kids for years to come for 5 cents. And not many places, I think, could say that. So.
Well, and a lot of that, if I may, over the last many years, we've had our bond rating, we've been upgraded, and I think that is a testament to our county administrator, our staff, the Board of Supervisors, really everybody, including the schools, working together to try to make sure that we have costs and things in line and that we turn over every rock. And I know Randy and the finance folks have done a great job in that. And speaking of finances, as we look, I know this year's been a bit of an enigma to everyone. What type of savings do you anticipate the schools realizing as a result of what's taken place throughout this current budget cycle?
So our finance director is actually going to give that report at our regular meeting, which follows this. And again, that's hard to estimate. And when you see that report, she's broken down the electrical savings and all of the savings, and we'll share that with you. And then, of course, we've talked about the county through your CARES funding paying for the Chromebooks will free up more money. The unknown still is that sales tax. We pretty much have a strong idea what the lottery funds are going to be less for this year, that sales tax is more of the unknown. We've estimated based on what we've already received, and so we have had 1 month of that. But knowing that it's 2 months behind, we're looking at 4 months. And so that's in those figures. So our estimate will be conservative, but anything else, we've basically frozen everything so that we can save as every dime. In fact, I was asked something today, I forgot what it was, but my answer was no. And we kind of joked, we said, this is the year of no. And because we do understand, we're in an unknown circumstance. So our plan is to give back every dime we can, so that can be utilized, whether we need it going into next year, whether we need it for architectural fees, whatever it may be. So we really won't know that till, what about August, Randy, I think?
Right.
Yes. But we'll have a good idea.
Say something? I have been quiet, I guess purposely, just to hear. Okay, I'm sorry. And I'm wearing this mask because of COVID-19, and I'm going to have some surgery later this month, so I'm going to be going in quarantine as soon as I'm finished with my meetings tonight. I was quiet during this whole session because I wanted to hear what the Board of Supervisors had to say, and I am in favor of doing the 2 schools at the same time if possible, because the most important thing is that we give the students in Isle of Wight County the best education we can give them, and in doing so, build the buildings that they need to get that education. And going forward, I know you're in a position of funding these buildings, so you're all about budget. And I agree with you, because I'm a native here, born here. It's important that we build what we can build for the students within our budget without having our citizens raising these taxes. As most of you know, majority of the people that are living, tax-paying people in this community are what we consider senior citizens, above the age of 55, planning to retire, meaning they're getting fixed incomes. And for us to continue to go back and say, we need this, so we add to those taxes. I understand your position. And as well, I hope you all understand our position as the educators. We are just trying to do the best we can for every student in Isle of Wight County. We want to be able to give them the best education that we can afford within our means. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could mention one more thing that I do think is important, because we're talking about we need to build for what we can afford. One of the things we did and asked the construction management firm that reviewed the different prototypes from the architectural firm was to say, we want you to compare it to Carrollton for equity. And as far as educational spaces, as far as cooperative learning spaces, we don't want something that's going to set the new standard or some new fangled. We want it comparative. So that was part of looking at the prototypes, and Florence Bowser fell within those guidelines. So I just wanted to let the public know that we are looking at making sure it matches with what we currently have and what we're doing.
It's consistent, not one of those things where we raise the bar higher just so that everything else needs to be upgraded.
Exactly. And our buildings, Carrollton is a great building. It wasn't designed for cooperative learning, but with those wide hallways and stuff, it was able to adapt to the changes that we're at. So yeah, we chose that as a model. And really, they did look at Windsor Elementary as well. Windsor Elementary is very comparative. So this will not be out of the realm of what we already have.
I'd like to just pick up there with, at this juncture, you're in negotiations with the architect?
Yes, sir.
Have you hired the management construction?
No, that RFP is already on the street.
So that RFP is on the street.
Yes.
But in looking at what the construction manager can do for us, Part of it is help us negotiate with the architect,
Yes, they can.
okay? So when is that going to be awarded, and who is the committee that's going to select this? Because as I mentioned at an earlier meeting, I think picking the school and the architect and the format, that's certainly the school board. From that point, no, we got a partner.
Right. So we have discussed that, and we have no problem with a Board of Supervisors member serving on that, and those interviews and helping make that decision. Yes.
Okay.
We want to find the best person possible out there to negotiate for us.
Well,
If I
then
could just add one more, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Then I would suggest one other person to your committee, and that is Mr. Tom Durig. I think he's quite skilled at negotiating. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
That's better.
I'm saying that I have an additional person I'd like to represent the board as well, as a board member, and that is Mr. Tom Durig, if he's willing to accept that. He's got a background in purchasing for construction, and so he understands the negotiating process, and I think can bring quite a bit to bear on that.
Then the rains came.
And it's raining on our parade.
As long as they're not coming
So
in.
the other thing I would like to see is a schedule. When is that RFP? You said in about a week you can get it out, and when would it come back? The process you're going to go through to do that, with a target date of August 2023 as being the opening of the Westside. I mean, it has to be slippage to 2024 or mid-year or something like that, but I would think that was how you would want to go out with that RFP. And then I'd like to see a schedule of how you see everything else occurring, including the awarding of the contract to the management company and forming this committee and getting that going. Looking at middle schools, I don't think that's the job of this joint committee. I think that's the school board's prerogative.
I believe we can meet all of those requests.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, just for the sake of making sure that we have all of our bases covered per legal parameters, Mr. Jones, would it be in order for the board to move, authorizing the schools to move forward with an RFP for Westside? I just want to make sure we capture that properly so there's no question later on. Okay. Then I would move, if I may, that the Board of Supervisors approve the moving forward of the RFP for a new Westside. That's my motion.
Y'all have heard the motion. Any discussion? Mr. Jones?
Yes, sir. Bryce? Yes.
Mr. Rosie? Yes.
Mr. McCarty?
Yes.
Mr. Jefferson? Yes. Mr. Davis?
Yes. Motion carries.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman, just if I could mention one more aspect of the financing piece, and Dr. Thornton and I have talked about this as far as the funding for the initial cost of the design work is, once they select an architect, then they're going to start working and submitting bills. Of course, it depends on our timeline for the bonds. If we go forward with October timeframe, that should be fine. We have the $950,000 we had set aside for Hardy. We're using part of that money to purchase the property, so there'll be a little bit left, but certainly not enough to cover the contract. There is an option that we can utilize if we don't have the funds in hand when they start to receive bills. We can adopt a reimbursement resolution, which would allow us to be reimbursed from the bond proceeds once the bonds are issued. So we could, basically dip into our fund balance temporarily for cash flow purposes until we reimburse ourselves. I would like to note, though, that it's important to keep these, even if the board speeds up the process for Westside, it's important that we still space out the bonds so we don't issue them all at one time. If we issue them all at one time, then we could run into some issues with violating our own internal policies about what percentage of our budget goes to debt service. So it helps us to keep them spread out. I think from a cash flow perspective, we still would have enough money to pay the bills. We'll have to, reconfigure the amounts probably a little bit as we get closer and once you get a better idea of what Hardy and Westside would cost. But I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that it's still important to keep these two bond issues separated and not lump them all together, even if you speed up the process for Westside.
Thank you.
And then as Mr. Keaton has indicated, sometime around 2031, 2032, looking at the schedule, we could do something absolutely ridiculous for a government. We could lower or give back the taxpayer their 5 cents.
That's what I was saying earlier, is that once you get to that point, that's the tipping point where you break even. The reduction in the old debt service exceeds the amount of the revenue needed for this new debt service. So, yeah. Now, of course, that in 10 years, you may have other needs as well, but for this particular need, for these 5 years, and I want to reiterate that this bond issue is not just for the schools, it's for all the other needs for the county as well, which includes fire and rescue apparatus and some other projects. But for this amount, which is, $64 million over this 5-year period, that covers the schools and our other needs.
For the 5 years.
Subject to what the actual cost of the schools are.
And that's for a 5-year.
That's a 5-year capital project funding.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes before our next meeting begins, so we're going to have to bring this to closure. Will we have a specific date that we can set after we get all the information that we're now going to be working on, and so that we can get back together?
Yes, I can gather all of the information and send that to Randy, and then if we want to decide to meet again based on having all that information, yes.
It's been some good discussion, and so right now, I'm going to adjourn our meeting.
Adjourn our meeting also.
We have 5 minutes.